I've been running marathons for 10 years now. Just a few weeks ago, I clocked in at a personal best of 2:35, but my progress has been anything but linear. Even just this year, I ran a 2:47, so there's a 12-minute difference across my performances in just a few months. So when I reflect back, I believe that there are about 3 facets of my training that remain constant when I perform well. There's also one constant that remains the same in all of my bad marathon performances. I want to outline these for you today so you can speed up your learning process and hopefully minimize the potential for having a bad marathon experience. To start, I'm going to give you a bit of a hot take that I think process versus outcome is a bit of BS, or at least it's oversimplified. You may have heard the saying, control the controllables. Even I say that. You want to take care of the things that are within your control. Your heart rate, your energy expenditure, your fluid intake, how fast you're running on a hill, how well you're handling the conditions. Those are all in your control. What's out of your control is what the finish time says when you cross the line. Where I think it's oversimplified is in the outcome portion of this philosophy. I believe that there is outcome focus and outcome fixation. Outcome fixation is most definitely one of the constants that has remained the same in all of my bad marathon performances. To show you what I mean, I'm going to give you the tale of 2 marathons. The first time I ran under 2:40 for the marathon, that lure of running under 2:40, the motivation of that outcome had me pushing beyond what I thought was possible in the last 10 kilometers. If I had not put a focus on an outcome, I would have been content in running hard all the way to the finish and not worrying too much about what the finish time set. However, having that outcome focus and that motivator of an outcome in a specific time, one that I knew I was capable of, which I'll touch on the 3 facets that have led to my positive marathon experiences, I wouldn't have experienced that level of self-transcendence that I experienced on that day when I clocked in at a 2:39. I want to contrast this with the story of the first time I tried to go under 2:40 for the marathon and ended up running just under 3 hours. My poor performance started all the way back in training. In training, I'd picked this arbitrary number and then I'd attacked training trying to hit the numbers that I knew I needed in order to get a sub 2:40 on race day. I completely ignored all warning signs that these numbers were outside of my capabilities. Then come race day, within the race it was point to point and we had a headwind a majority of the way. It also ended up being really hot, and I remember running with a friend of mine who were both going for sub 2:40, and I said to him, this is starting to feel pretty hard, and we're at 15k, about 10 miles into the race. It should not feel hard at any point, but I pushed on. I neglected how I felt, I neglected the conditions, I neglected my heart rate, all of my numbers. The one number I focused on was the outcome I wanted, the pace that was going to get me the outcome I wanted. Inevitably ended with me walking a majority of the second half of the race and had me finishing completely exhausted and disappointed with a performance I could have done almost any day of the week. The differentiation here is fixation versus focus. When I actually ran under 2:40 for the marathon, I don't believe I was in any better or worse shape, but I was open-minded enough to know that it may not happen all the way back in training. So I wasn't overtraining in the training leading up to the event, and then within the event itself, I was open to the possibility that it may not happen and I would adjust to the conditions if they needed, which allowed me to run slightly slower and negative split the race and get into the position where I could run under 2:40. When I didn't run under 2:40 and ended up running just under 3 hours, there was no open-mindedness. It was a complete fixation on what inevitably is going to end up to failure. Maybe it'll work out for you, maybe it wouldn't, but it really just comes down to how lucky you were in predicting that goal outcome relative to your performance capabilities and the conditions that you got on the day. Over all of my good marathon performances, 3 facets of my training have remained constant. It might surprise you a little bit that they're more psychological than physiological. It is process, honesty, and the long run. No matter how well formulated your training plan, it will never predict life outside of training. Whenever you have to pick up a sick kid early from school, knock off work to go get your car fixed, all of it applies stress that you need to be able to adapt to. This is where process and honesty are so important for the training you're doing day to day. When your life gets in the way of your training, which it inevitably will, you need to be aware and honest of yourself that you are not going to be able to hit the specific targets of of that day or of that week. This is the next layer of outcome fixation, which sits below the finish time in the event itself. This is needing to hit certain paces, run a certain amount of time or miles per week. If you are fixated on these arbitrary numbers, you're not being honest with yourself in terms of your capabilities, and you're actually stepping out of the process of building towards a marathon. The process of building towards a marathon or any race is that something is going to go wrong. If you understand that the process is things going wrong and on average everything being able to go right and some training sessions going absolutely horribly, you can be honest with yourself day to day that this is just part of the process. I'm absolutely fine knocking down 3 intervals from 4 because it's just been one of those days. For me, applying process and honesty to the long run has the biggest impact on my marathon performances. Too often on my marathon long runs, I've ignored process and honesty and fully attached myself to the outcome fixation. In doing so, I ignore all warning signs that I'm working way too hard, progress with the workout, digging myself into a massive hole, creating a prime example of junk training. Marathon long run workouts are more than just performance indicators. The extensive zone 3 aerobic threshold running helps you build the strength and stamina needed to optimize your marathon performance. By thrashing yourself and pushing up into intensity zone 4 and 5 well above your aerobic threshold, you're ignoring the physiological goal of the session and ironically making your arbitrary goal even more unrealistic. Whenever I've run a good marathon and had good quality training in the build-up, I've used heart rate as my primary metric, power as a secondary metric, and then completely ignored pace. By ignoring pace during my long run workouts, I avoid the fixation and focused on the honest process of the workout rather than just thrashing myself with junk training. Within my day job, helping runners from all around the world reset their training to put them on a productive path towards desirable results and reach their performance potential, one of the most common themes I see is around this poor execution of the long run, which leads to disappointing marathon performances. I highlighted this with the concept of what could you do next weekend in this video, which I highly recommend you check out if you're building up towards a marathon and you need to incorporate a bit of honesty and process to your build up. All right, that's me. Catch you on the next one.